This is Book Public from Texas Public Radio. I'm Yvette Benavides. Severo Perez was born in San Antonio, Texas in 1941. In 1972, he moved to Los Angeles to pursue his dreams to become a filmmaker in the motion picture industry. In those years, the technology was not what it is today, and his journey has been a circuitous path. The film adaptation of Tomás Rivera's novella, And the Earth Did Not Swallow Him, remains what Perez calls his Everest, a mountain he scaled for some 20 years before realizing his goal. The film follows the lives of a family of migrant workers from South Texas in the 1950s. It's an incredible Bildungsroman, or coming-of-age story, and Perez matches the poignancy and power of Rivera's book in this film. Severo Perez's filmmaker's journey recounts his story from his humble beginnings on San Antonio's west side to today, and a celebration of his film, And the Earth Did Not Swallow Him, being nominated to the National Film Registry by Congressman Joaquín Castro. I spoke to filmmaker and author Severo Perez. Well, I want to start at the beginning with your childhood in San Antonio, Texas. Can you talk a little bit about your childhood?
Well, I was very lucky. We were poor, but I never realized that because I never needed for anything. I was very fortunate to have two wonderful parents. My father was a Kelly field worker, but he was also quite intelligent and was an inventor and somebody ahead of his time. He only went to the seventh grade in school, so he had to join his father selling vegetables from a truck in San Antonio's Angeles district. And but he regretted never finishing school. He eventually earned his GED and went to San Antonio College and got himself an AA degree. And he became a gemologist and kind of a he was a wonderful guy. And I was very lucky to have a wonderful mother as well. She was a master seamstress. When we were little, she made a lot of our clothes. So we always looked really good. I went to Little Flower School, parochial elementary school on South Zamora Street. And pretty much I was very lucky to be raised in the West Side in a very kind of protected atmosphere before encountering the broader racism that was Texas and still is to a certain extent.
That dominant impression of your parents really comes through in this book. I mean, this is a very wide-ranging story about your life as a filmmaker, but these ideas about your parents certainly come through, that they were very supportive of you, even though your mother was very fretful and worried about you, but they were very supportive of you, and they were extremely industrious and intelligent. And it made me think in the moments when you would write about them in the book, it made me think that that was such an amazing inheritance for you from them. How old were you? Do you remember when it was that this sort of filmmaking bug bit, and when this took hold for you? Because you were very young.
Yeah, well, here's the story about that is that when I was about 7 years old, my mother needed to pay a bill. She was very sick. It was like a July, and she had the flu, and the bill was overdue. And she asked if I could take the bus downtown and pay the bill for her. 7 years old. I would never trust one of my children or grandchildren to do an errand like that. But she, put the money in a little piece of paper, folded it, put it in my pocket, and told me not to take it out until I got to the Department of Water and Power, and to make sure that I asked for the manager and asked to get a discount because the bill was overdue and then it was a penalty charged. So I went downtown. I caught the bus downtown and went to the Department of Water and Power. I asked to speak to the guy. He gave me the discount. And I should have gone straight home, but I didn't. I decided to explore downtown San Antonio. So, of course, one of the most wonderful places to be was to stand outside the Majestic Theater in July and wait for somebody to open the door to have that sweep of air sweep over you, air-conditioned air. I did that for about 10 minutes before somebody started asking me why I was there, and I moved on. But but that really began, that moment of responsibility that I took and opened up a whole world to me because then mom would send me on errands all the time. By the time I was 7, I was also joined the YMCA downtown. That gave me ample time to explore more. Another time when I paid the bill, the penalty was like 11 cents. And she said I could keep it. So I took that 11 cents and went to the Majestic Theater and paid the 9-cent fee to get inside to watch a movie. Today I really don't remember what movie I saw. The fact is that I just fell in love with movies at that moment and was thrilled to sit in the fourth row of the Majestic Theater looking at that wonderful screen in that magical theater. I never figured that I would wanted to be a filmmaker, but I felt that somebody has to write the stories for these things. Of course, I was also a radio addict and listened to radio during the middle and late 1940s. So that those narrative stories existed in my head. I could visualize all the adventures that people went through just through the characters' voices and the sound effects. So by the time I was in the fifth grade, I actually started writing little stories, little narratives that had a beginning, middle, and end. Probably were all handwritten, and they all kind of fit in one page, one ruled notebook page. But that sort of began that. I was a very skinny kid. I also was dyslexic, which I didn't realize until years later. So I was kind of clumsy and kind of a goofy kind of kid. I was very different than the other boys. I don't know why. I mean, it was like I was not interested in any of the things they did. I was interested in music. I was interested in reading. I was interested in science. I'd rather spend the afternoon outside in the garden looking at insects than playing any sport. That sense of differentness sort of drove me to feel like that the only place I had any agency was on the written page. That encouraged me to write more. And then, of course, while other kids were, getting awards for baseball and basketball and things like that, I was being recognized for my first short stories. So that's all it took. I wasn't going to leave that. I wasn't going to, get away from that. Somewhere along the line, once I got to college, I realized that the literature, the literature franca of the United States was movies. I couldn't shake that, and I just felt like particularly the way Latinos were treated in the movies, specifically in movies like Treasure of Sierra Madre or Red River or The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and films like that, where the Mexicans are treated as sort of usurpers or greedy people trying to protect their land, which in fact was what they were trying to do, protect their land from the usurpers who were coming in and taking it over to mine the wealth that existed in other places like Arizona or the wealth that existed in Texas in oil and in land for growing cattle. I set out to try to write stories that represented the world I knew, as opposed to the world that existed in the movies. That led to writing of Soldier Boy, which is an experience about my father's return from the Second World War, and other films. Of course, when I read Tomás Rivera's Y no se lo tragó la tierra, I immediately recognized that this man was speaking in the same language that I grew up speaking. He listened to the same music. We saw the same movies. We read the same books. We heard the same folk tales. And even though my family didn't do migrant labor, my grandfather did sell vegetables in the streets. So I grew up around the produce market in downtown San Antonio.
That must have been such a magical moment. And I know how you describe it in the book that you had had occasion to learn about Dr. Tomas Rivera. And then you were in one of your offices and you had a copy of his book there and you picked it up. And then you had this eureka moment of, I can tell this story on film.
I certainly felt I could. I certainly felt I could take his story and translate it into a film. I saw the film in my mind as I was reading the book. Of course, that was 1974, and I didn't really finish the film until 1994, or it didn't premiere until 1994. Technically, maybe I read it in 73. The idea is that it took me 21 years from the moment I read that book to realize it. The fact is that the movie that exists was very much like the movie I saw in my head in 1973, with a lot of compromises, of course. That's the nature of film.
The story of the migrant farm worker, I think, is not depicted nearly enough. And I discern a certain amount of misinformation that persists about farm workers, and it's always been the case. So I appreciate what the film reinforces about the dignity of the migrant farm worker, the industriousness, the work ethic. That's one part of the story. The other part, of course, has to do with the negative issues depicted in the story, the misinformation, the discrimination, the abuse, the deplorable working conditions. What I think about your film, even 30 years on, and I can watch it today and feel the same way about it, is the very hard truths that it tells about what the plight of the migrant farm worker was and perhaps still is. What do you think about how the film can be received in 2024?
Well, I hope that people perceive the same things that I do, which is that the human spirit is large. Nobody wants to slave out in a hot field every day and, face the possibilities of sunstroke and things like that, dehydration. But the fact is that that's not what I think we, as because I could say even though I was not a white migrant worker, I consider myself a we in the sense that I've had to struggle in my life, and I've never looked at the downside. I've always looked at the positive side, the places where I want to reach rather than the places that have foiled me. Thinking about the moments of success, the moments of pleasure, the moments of fun that that are part of life. Writing the book, I really felt I did not want to create this as a complete downer. I didn't want people to think that these people are miserable. These people live with a lot of joy in their life, a lot of pleasure in their life, a lot of uh, fun in their life. We have wonderful food. We have wonderful
Mhm.
music. And even though we express our pain and our sorrow through our music and in our literature, there's something healing in those songs. I wanted to provide something similar to that with the film, that it becomes a affirmation of life, of the affirmation of a vision, an affirmation of art.
It is that undeniably. I was thinking too, because your book, Filmmaker's Journey, is about your life as a filmmaker coming up as a young kid in San Antonio, making this big jump to Los Angeles and that whole scene, and really working very hard, making even commercials and other things while you were also trying to work on your art and your filmmaking. And I was thinking about the character of Marcos in Y no se lo tragó la tierra. And I kept thinking like Severo Perez is like is like Marcos, and that you encountered negative experiences, but extremely positive experiences too at the same time. And this is really true for Marcos too, as a sort of a coming of age story for him. And we see the very difficult isolation he experienced. His parents had to move along to follow the crops, and he stayed behind in Minnesota, and he was bullied in school. But there was a teacher who supported him and stood up for him and could see something in him. And the character of Bartolo teaches him something, sort of unwittingly, and that is that the voice is the seed of love in the darkness. And that is, remember, write it down so people will know. These are lines from your film. And I was thinking, that's exactly what Severo Perez has done. So there's this incredible parallel that I now see. I've watched your film for years, since probably since 1996, I think may have been the first time. And year after year, I've watched it multiple times. And now that I've read your book, I don't think I'll be able to watch the film the same way again without thinking about your story too.
I must say that when I spoke to Tomas about adapting his book before he died, he kept telling me that consider it fiction, consider it fiction. According to his brothers, it was semi-autobiographical. For me, I could never imagine some of the horrible things that the boy in the book experienced. The
Yes,
death of the children, los quemaditos, the murder of the mojado,
yes.
and those kinds of things, which are things which I have not anywhere close in my life experienced. But I've experienced things close enough to that I could empathize with the character and his silence to those crimes or to those events. I think that my takeaway from it is that it's that spirit that looks beyond those tragedies at and to think about what Tomas achieved in his life. I met him when he was like the dean at the San Antonio University of Texas, San Antonio, when it was in its very early stages. And then, of course, when he became chancellor of UC Riverside, UC Riverside at the time probably only had about 4 or 5 thousand students. It wasn't what it is today. It was his leadership that basically put that university on the map. So it took some kind of imagination. It took some kind of internal strength. He was always so generous in the sense that he was never critical, which is one of my faults. I'm quite willing to find fault. I'm quite willing to point my finger, but not him. No, he was always kept a very positive attitude about every situation and try to find the best way out of it that would be a win-win for everybody. And I've tried to take that with me, but I'm not Tomas Rivera.
The thing about the character of the boy, Marcos, when Doña Coquita says, "You're so quiet, you're as watchful as the moon." And there's something about his silence, as you said, and his watchfulness and how observant he was that made him, as we can kind of surmise and predict, that made him the writer of this story, that made him the teller of this story. So that's the parallel I was kind of thinking about. And I was wondering too about in your life as a filmmaker, you have, as you said, you've encountered negative situations, maybe not quite the very terrible things that depicted in the novel that Marcos experiences, but negative interactions that you encountered, that you faced. There was a level of maybe classism or racism that you experienced in Los Angeles and other places. It's interesting you mentioned the depiction of Mexicans in film, and sometimes those actors were not themselves Mexican American or Mexican. And so I wonder, all these years on in 2024, what do you think is the state of things in the movie industry as to Mexican Americans or maybe more generally Latinos?
Well, I wrote an essay about 1980 about my experience in Hollywood, and the little essay was called "Where is Porky Pig?" Now, just bear with me a second because this does go somewhere. Porky Pig was, a cartoon character and many, quite popular for a period of time. However, he never had the same success as Bugs Bunny or Tom and Jerry, and most of the characters that are represented in cartoons that have existed over time, a Foghorn Leghorn, the rooster, are animals we don't eat. We eat pigs. So we don't want to get too close to know anything about pigs. So we can eat them. And I think that that's kind of the part of the aspect of exploitation, that people can have Mexicans in their house as maids and housekeepers and nannies or gardeners or positions like that. But to ever recognize them would mean to have to pay them equally, to recognize that that they deserve equal pay or deserve to be treated like everyone else. But economically, it's not advantageous to the principal group to accept the values or the life of minorities. So they're quite willing to live with this situation. Well, yes, we remember Porky, uh, but we don't see him in too many movies anymore because we don't want to be reminded that we eat them. We don't want to be reminded that we exploit Mexicans, that they're the people out in the field that may not get paid at the end of the day. That's something that's happened to me here in town, where the laborers have been working on a house down the street, and they come to my porch and beg me that the owner does not want to pay them, that he's disappeared and he's left them there stranded. So has it changed? I don't really see it changing. People will point and say, but what about Guillermo del Toro? And what about that new director from Chile or Uruguay? And what about the new director from so and so? Those are all upper class people who were trained in Europe. They come here and I think your term was classist. Well, they're in the same class as the people that are running the system. And I come from a working class background. I have a very definite concern about where I grew up and what I'm about. And I don't see it as a life of tragedy. I see my, as one person I grew up with said, "Qué lindo es ser mexicano." Just the fact that we have wonderful music, a sense of community, a sense of fun when we're together, music, food. These are the things I remember and celebrate. Yes, there's also jealousy. There's also all the things that exist in all societies of people where people fall in love, they break up, they get angry, they steal, but at the same time they have children, they nourish, they look forward to a future where they can have more days where they can celebrate together as a group and enjoy the music and enjoy the food. I mean, the most wonderful days of my life as a child would be at being at my grandmother's house on a day of celebration where she would make chicken mole.
Mhm.
Man, that was the greatest.
The sense of pride, nothing can take that away, I think, from the Mexican and the Mexican American, to my mind. I wanted to ask you too, Severo Perez, what do you think of this nomination by Congressman Joaquín Castro, nominated and the earth did not swallow him, your film, to the National Film Registry? What's important to know about something like this? Yes, it's an incredible accolade, but something tells me that you have other thoughts about it. What do you make of it?
It would give me a great sense of completion to have it accepted by the National Film Registry. It would be so wonderful. It would that would happen because I would know that all the work that went into making that film, and it was probably the Everest of my life. The climbing Mount Everest,
Mhm.
being the pinnacle of somebody's career. Well, making that film was my Everest. It took every bit of my energy, every bit of my intelligence, every bit of my creativity, every bit of my patience, and
Mhm.
all of my love uh, to deliver that film. And it was never easy. Every day was a challenge. Every day was were compromises being forced on me. We're in Minnesota shooting for 9 days, and we had planned for 3 rain days. it rained 9 out of the 11 days. So at night, I was rewriting scenes for the next day, so we could shoot them as interiors, what had been originally an exterior shots. It is, it would certainly be a sense of completion for me that I crossed the finish line finally with that film, that it got recognition and it's going to be there forever, or as long as there's the United States.
Severo Perez, thank you so much. What an honor to get to talk to you today. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so much.
Severo Perez is a playwright, novelist, and director of films and television programming, including his award-winning And the Earth Did Not Swallow Him, adapted from a 1971 novel by Tomás Rivera. A native of San Antonio, Texas, he's lived and worked in Los Angeles since 1972. You can read more about Severo Perez at the website of the Whitliff Collections from Texas State University. This has been Book Public from Texas Public Radio. Write to us at bookpublic@tpr.org. Jacob Rosati composed our theme music. Dan Katz is Texas Public Radio's news director. I'm Yvette Benavides.